Sergeant Marcus Thompson eased into his patrol car before dawn, the chill Michigan air cutting through his uniform like a blade. A 20-year veteran of the Redford Township Police Department, he'd earned every stripe on his sleeve through long nights on cold streets and endless community meetings. Marcus took pride in his work. He was the officer parents called when their kids got lost, the face they trusted when trouble brewed. But that morning, nothing in his 2 decades of service could have prepared him for what was waiting at Precinct 4. He strode through the precinct's sliding doors at 7:15 a.m., boots echoing on the linoleum. The bullpen was strangely hushed. Familiar chatter about coffee breaks and recent arrests had been replaced by furtive glances and clipped conversations. As Marcus made his way to his desk, he caught Officer Patel's eyes. The junior cop lowered his gaze too quickly. Marcus frowned, but didn't ask questions. He settled into his chair, flipping open his notebook to review yesterday's shift report. A firm hand landed on his shoulder. Before he could look up, Captain Harding's gravelly voice cut through the air. "Thompson, office. Now." Marcus rose, alert. Harding was a straight-laced white captain near retirement, not known for dramatics. Yet his jaw was clenched, and his eyes were hard. Inside Harding's cramped office, 3 white officers flanked the desk. A lieutenant, a detective, and a patrol sergeant, all clad in crisp uniforms. On the captain's desk lay a stack of folders stamped Internal Affairs. Harding motioned to them. "Sergeant, you're under investigation for accepting bribes. We have eyewitness statements, bank records, and video evidence." Marcus felt the air thicken. "Bribes? Captain, that's impossible." His voice was steady, but his heart thundered. He stared down at the folders, photos of cash bundles, surveillance clips showing a hand exchanging an envelope, even a printed bank statement showing large deposits into an account he'd never opened. Each piece of evidence was laid out with chilling clarity. Lieutenant Davis stepped forward, voice low and clinical. "Multiple sources place you taking cash from a local business owner in exchange for overlooking code violations." Detective Reynolds added, "You're lucky we're giving you a chance to respond before we bring charges." The room felt suddenly too small. The weight of their accusation pressed in on Marcus from all sides. He shook his head, disbelief and indignation warring on his face. "Those statements are false. The bank account, someone forged it. I've never met this business owner in my life." His words rang hollow against the stacked proof. The detective's lips curved in a pitying smile. "We'll see what finds," he said. And with that, Harding signaled Marcus to surrender his badge and firearm. As Marcus walked out, badge clipped to the desk, service weapon locked away, he passed colleagues in the hallway. Their eyes avoided his, some filled with suspicion, others with shame. Word spread instantly. "Black cop caught taking bribes," whispered in break rooms and police car radios. Within hours, local news vans surrounded the precinct, broadcasting the sensational headlines of a respected officer turned criminal. That night, alone in his modest apartment, Marcus stared at the photograph on his mantel. Him in full dress uniform, shaking hands with community leaders, smiling beside neighborhood children. Could that man be the same one accused of corruption? His hands trembled as he dialed his wife, voice tight. "They've taken everything," he said simply. And as the city lights winked on outside, Marcus knew his fight for justice, and his very career, had only just begun. By mid-morning, the day after his abrupt suspension, Marcus Thompson sat alone in the dim light of his living room. The internal affairs folders spread across his coffee table like silent judges. Each photograph, each typed statement, seemed to mock him with their certainty. But beneath the weight of accusation stirred a familiar spark, the unshakable conviction that truth, when pursued relentlessly, could prevail. He tapped the edge of a surveillance, still showing a blurred figure exchanging an envelope over a backroom counter. The timestamp read 3:42 p.m., but on the day in question, Marcus had been on patrol 2 miles away, logging a routine traffic stop at exactly that time. He reached for his notebook and flipped to the page where he'd recorded that vehicle's license plate and the arresting officer's name, Patrolman Lee Harper. Lee Harper was one of the few white officers who'd ever treated Marcus as an equal. They'd often been partners on late-night shifts, sharing coffee and swapping stories of family back home. If anyone could confirm Marcus's alibi, it was Lee. Marcus picked up his phone and, heart pounding, dialed Lee's direct line. "Marcus." Lee's voice came shaky on the first ring. I I saw the news. I'm so sorry, man. I need you to remember everything about that afternoon last Tuesday," Marcus said, his tone both urgent and steady. "License plate, time, place, every detail. I was on that traffic stop from 3:30 to 4:15 p.m. You can log into MDT and pull the dispatch record." Lee paused, then exhaled. "I'll pull it now. I've got your back." With a small nod, though Marcus knew Lee couldn't see it, he ended the call and turned to the next folder. Transcribed statements from eyewitnesses who claimed to have seen him slip an envelope into his pocket behind the precinct's evidence locker. Each statement read as if lifted from the same typewriter, language too uniform to be genuine. He jotted a note. Compare handwriting, check original statements at IA. Late that afternoon, Marcus walked the precinct's back corridors, feigning interest in the bulletin board while scanning the surveillance monitors. The evidence room camera angle, he realized, had a blind spot obscured by a support beam, exactly where a planted envelope could have been slipped and later retrieved. If he could secure the raw video files, he might expose a gap big enough to show tampering. Across town, Detective Rosa Solano, a stout, no-nonsense black investigator, read Marcus's text message. "Need your help. Possible evidence tampering in IA video. Can we meet?" Solano's family had moved to Detroit when she was a child, and she'd risen through the department's ranks on sheer grit and meticulous casework. She knew that taking this on would place her squarely at odds with powerful precinct insiders, but she also knew Marcus's reputation for integrity. That evening, Marcus met Lee and Solano in the shadowy corner of a closed coffee shop near the precinct. Steam curled from fresh lattes as they huddled over his notebook. Lee slid a printout from his squad car's mobile data terminal across the table. Call time 3:29 p.m., location 38th and Woodward. Duration 45 minutes, just as Marcus had said. Solano skimmed the eyewitness statements on her tablet. "These were all typed 7 minutes apart," she observed, tapping her screen. "And look, same formatting quirks. Whoever drafted these used a template, then just swapped names. If we can get the originals, compare metadata, we'll have proof." Marcus leaned back, relief and determination warring inside him. "I want the raw surveillance footage from the evidence room cameras," he said. "And I need the digital logs for any bank account matching my name or badge number. They used a shell account. Someone created it just for this setup." Over the next 2 days, Solano leveraged her detective's badge to place a routine request for the IA files, while Lee arranged to pull his MDT logs and dash cam records off the department network. At home, Marcus downloaded bank statements from his own accounts. There was no unexplained deposit, and examined his pay stubs for any anomalies. He compiled his findings in a new, unalterable PDF, stamped with precise dates and times. All the while, tension hummed through the precinct's halls. Rumors of Marcus's dirty secret spread among white officers, while black officers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure if speaking out would invite the same fate. But quietly, two unlikely allies, Lee and Solano, stood with him, offering snippets of corroboration and technical know-how. On the third evening, Marcus received an anonymous tip. A USB drive slipped under his door, labeled only with a date. Inside was footage from the evidence room camera, unbroken from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. A careful frame-by-frame review revealed a 15-second gap precisely at 3:42 p.m. The camera's file metadata showed it had been overwritten. Marcus exhaled so forcefully the coffee steam billowed. He loaded the files onto his secure drive, his pulse hammering. "This is it," he whispered to himself. "This is enough to fight back." He knew the road ahead would be perilous. Accusations could deepen, retaliation could come swiftly. But for the first time since his badge had been taken, he felt the momentum shifting. Surrounded by evidence and backed by two colleagues willing to risk everything, Marcus Thompson was no longer a framed suspect. He was a man on a mission for justice. When Marcus Thompson strode into Captain Harding's office the following morning, he carried with him a sheaf of documents, Bank records, dispatch logs, surveillance timestamps, all meticulously annotated. His face was calm, but his mind buzzed with the certainty that truth could dismantle the conspiracy against him. Harding sat behind his desk, arms folded, flanked by Lieutenant Davis and Patrol Sergeant Bradfield, the same officers who had accused Marcus of bribery just days before. The air was thick with tension. "Sergeant Thompson," Harding began, voice clipped, "you asked for this meeting. State your business." Marcus set his files on the desk and spoke without hesitation. "Captain, I believe you have been presented with doctored evidence. These bank statements," he tapped the first folder, "show a forged account number. Here," he slid forward the dispatch logs Lee Harper had obtained. "You'll see I was on a traffic stop at 3:42 p.m. on the day in question, far from the precinct. And this USB drive contains unedited footage from the evidence room camera with a 15-second gap exactly at that timestamp." For a heartbeat, the three white officers' faces flickered with surprise. Marcus continued, "Someone within this department erased the original footage, inserted staged eyewitness statements, and manufactured a deposit to frame me. I demand an immediate, impartial review." Lieutenant Davis's lips curled into a patronizing smile. "That's a serious accusation, Thompson. You're accusing your superiors and colleagues of tampering with IA files?" Harding leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson, you realize the gravity of these claims? If you can't substantiate them, under departmental policy, you're looking at obstruction of justice yourself." His words were a thinly veiled threat. Marcus drew a steadying breath. "I have corroboration from Lee Harper, who can attest to my exact location, and Detective Solano has verified the metadata on those statements. I want Internal Affairs to examine the camera's raw drive and compare the original documents with their digital copies." For a moment, Harding's stern facade cracked, an almost imperceptible flicker of concern, but he quickly regained control. "Very well," Harding said, tapping his pen. "I'll forward your request. In the meantime, you are officially suspended without pay, pending the outcome of this reinvestigation." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He felt the blood drain from his face, but he forced himself to stand tall. "Understood, sir." As he exited the office, whispers trailed behind him. In the bullpen, white officers averted their eyes or sniffed disdainfully. "Too bad the good sergeant couldn't stay clean," one muttered. Another said, "Maybe he really was dirty all along." Each whisper was a jab, each glance a reminder that the presumption of guilt had already taken root. Meanwhile, black officers exchanged worried looks, fearful that speaking out would mark them as troublemakers. Over the next days, the precinct's daily rhythms shifted. Marcus's equipment locker was sealed, his patrol car reassigned. Even his department email was disabled, effectively cutting him off from case files and peer communication. Meanwhile, a barrage of anonymous memos appeared on the bulletin board. Reminder: zero tolerance for insubordination. Report any unauthorized access to IA files. Maintain chain of command. The messages were bland on their face, but served as warnings to anyone who might align with Marcus. Back at home, Marcus grappled with isolation. He logged his thoughts in a secure journal, noting every slight: a fellow sergeant refusing his handshake, a detective hanging up when Marcus called for a familiarization meeting on a violent crime case, a stack of file requests left unfilled. Attempts to reach out to veteran officers for support were met with polite excuses or stonewalling. The very department he had served faithfully was now weaponizing bureaucracy against him. Yet the adversity steeled his resolve. He and Detective Solano devised covert signals to share information. A text ping at 3:15 p.m. to indicate safe for a quick file drop, a code word in public radio channels to confirm receipt of critical documents. Lee Harper quietly delivered paper copies of his MDT logs into Marcus's mailbox. Every clandestine exchange reinforced their solidarity. By the end of the week, Marcus realized the precinct had split into two camps: those complicit in the frame-up and those quietly rallying behind him. Though outnumbered and officially silenced, Marcus's allies were real and armed with facts. The confrontation within the ranks had drawn clear lines. On one side, the corrupt clique determined to bury the truth. On the other, a handful of honest officers risking everything to ensure justice prevailed. And in that stark division, Marcus found the clarity he needed to continue the fight. By the end of that tense week, Marcus Thompson knew he could no longer trust the precinct's internal channels to deliver justice. Each day brought fresh bureaucratic roadblocks, denied requests for footage, stalled IA reviews, and anonymous memos warning anyone caught undermining the chain of command will face consequences. His phone buzzed with thinly veiled threats. "Drop it, Thompson." Read one text from an untraceable number. "You'll ruin your career." Late one Friday evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table under the harsh glare of a single lamp, the USB drive containing the corrupted footage glowing on his laptop. Across from him, Detective Rosa Solano spread out printed dispatch logs, bank record analysis, and emails confirming Lee Harper's alibi. The two worked in silence for hours, cross-checking every timestamp, every metadata tag, every signature. When they finished, their evidence dossier totaled some 70 pages, far too much to ignore. On Saturday morning, Marcus called an emergency meeting at the local chapter office of the Fraternal Order of Police. 20 officers, half white, half black and brown, packed into the cramped briefing room. He began by recounting the chronology, the framed deposit, the phony eyewitness statements, the erased 15 seconds of video. When he finished, the room was silent. Sergeant Linda Vasquez, one of the white officers who'd initially kept her distance, finally spoke. "This is more than just you," she said, voice trembling. "It's an attack on every honest cop. If they can do this to you, they can do it to any of us." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. That afternoon, Marcus met with local civil rights attorney Jamal Wright, who agreed to represent him pro bono. Together, they drafted a letter to the district attorney's office demanding an independent review of the precinct's IA files and a hearing before the County Oversight Board. Marcus appended his signed affidavit and included a redacted copy of the USB footage showing the camera gap. On Monday, as the precinct filled with morning traffic stops and paperwork, news crews gathered outside the station's front doors. Marcus emerged at precisely 10 a.m., flanked by Attorney Wright and Detective Solano. Cameras flashed as Wright read the statement. Sergeant Marcus Thompson was unlawfully suspended on the basis of falsified evidence. We call upon the Wayne County District Attorney to convene a special prosecutor, examine the unedited surveillance footage, and restore Sergeant Thompson's good name. This is a matter of justice for Sergeant Thompson, and for every officer whose integrity is being undermined by this conspiracy. Reporters peppered him with questions. Do you have proof of who tampered with the footage? Are you concerned for your safety? Marcus answered each calmly, I trust the evidence will speak for itself. Within hours, the story exploded across local media. The Detroit Free Press ran a front-page article detailing the allegations and quoting community leaders outraged by the scandal. Social media lit up with hashtags like #Justice for Thompson and #Cleanup Precinct 4. At the same time, Anonymous reached out via secure channels to pledge digital support, leaking precinct emails that referenced removing the problem officer. Back at the precinct, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Patrol cars idled outside, their drivers glued to news broadcasts. Internally, whispers of, "We knew something was off," filtered through the halls. White officers who'd earlier joined the frame-up found themselves under scrutiny. Lieutenant Davis requested emergency leave. Detective Reynolds withdrew from field assignments. By Wednesday, the Wayne County District Attorney announced he would appoint a special prosecutor and convene a public hearing. Mayor Cynthia Alvarez issued a statement. We cannot tolerate any abuse of power, especially within the ranks sworn to protect us. Sergeant Thompson's allegations are serious and demand a full, transparent investigation. That evening, hundreds of community members rallied outside Precinct 4's doors, holding handmade signs reading, "Protect the Protectors" and "Stop Framing Our Neighbors." Marcus stood on a makeshift stage beside clergy, union leaders, and youth organization directors. When he spoke, his voice carried both resolve and humility. Tonight, I stand not only for myself, but for every officer who's ever felt the sting of injustice. from within these walls and beyond. Change begins when we refuse to accept corruption in any form. Thank you for standing with me. As the crowd cheered, Detective Solano and Lee Harper exchanged relieved smiles. The ripple of solidarity that began in a closed coffee shop had swelled into a wave no one could drown. Marcus returned home late, physically drained but buoyed by hope. The fight was far from over. The hearing might yet vindicate his foes, but he had learned that the power of truth multiplied when magnified by community. In the glow of his desk lamp, he updated his dossier with notes from the press conference and prepared for the weeks of testimony ahead. Chapter 4 had ended not in isolation, but in collective action, and for Marcus Thompson, that alone felt like victory. By the time the special prosecutor's report landed on Captain Harding's desk, Precinct 4 felt more like a house of cards than a law and order institution. In a span of 3 weeks, every corner of the precinct had been turned inside out by internal affairs and county investigators. The morning the indictments were unsealed, twin announcements echoed through the hallways. Lieutenant Davis and Detective Reynolds were suspended without pay, pending criminal charges, and Captain Harding was placed on administrative leave. Inside the bullpen, officers gathered in clusters, whispers chasing rumors. Some white colleagues, once complicit in the frame-up, packed their desks in silence. Others, who'd silently cheered when Marcus was accused, watched the proceedings in stunned disbelief. The air smelled of stale coffee and fear, the unmistakable scent of a team imploding. Evidence unravels. At a packed courthouse hearing, forensic video analysts demonstrated how the evidence room camera's 15-second gap had been artificially induced. A timeline graphic showed Harding's badge number logging into the CCTV system moments before the footage cut out, and then logging back in to resume recording. Bank fraud experts testified that the shell account used for the bribery deposits had been created on a department-issued computer. Each revelation landed like a blow. Under oath, Lee Harper recounted the 45-minute traffic stop, corroborating Marcus's alibi with time-stamped dispatch logs and dashcam footage. Detective Solano testified next, detailing her forensic analysis of the typed eyewitness statements, the identical metadata signatures, the matching typographic errors, the suspicious timing of their filings. Community leaders and union representatives watched from the gallery, nodding in solidarity as the truth emerged. Fallout and accountability. By the end of the week, formal charges were filed: obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and abuse of office against Davis and Reynolds, conspiracy to frame a colleague against Harding, and lesser departmental policy violations for 2 junior officers. Each faced disciplinary review, and the local prosecutor's office announced they would pursue criminal indictments. On a gray Thursday morning, an official memo announced a sweeping personnel purge. Every officer with disciplinary filings over the past 5 years would have their records reviewed. Nearly 30% of the precinct's roster was on leave or under investigation. The precinct captain's office was emptied. Desks were cleared, personal effects boxed up. In their place, City Hall dispatched a crisis management team to shepherd the precinct through reforms, structural reforms. Within days, the police commissioner unveiled a Precinct 4 Renewal Plan, civilian oversight board, comprising community members, clergy, and retired judges, granted authority to review complaints and disciplinary actions, mandatory body camera uploads, all footage to be uploaded within 24 hours to a public portal, with limited exemptions for active investigations, anonymous reporting hotline, staffed by an independent nonprofit, ensuring no retaliation for whistleblowers, cultural competency training, quarterly workshops on implicit bias, de-escalation, and community engagement, mandatory for every officer. Detective Solano, Lee Harper, and Sergeant Thompson himself were invited to join the new advisory committee, an unprecedented move to include the very people who'd risked their careers to expose the corruption. A new beginning. As the precinct doors reopened under Acting Captain Elena Cruz, the atmosphere had shifted from tension to cautious optimism. Fresh recruits of diverse backgrounds arrived for orientation, greeted by banners reading, "Accountability, Transparency." Service officers once sidelined found new assignments. Some of Marcus's staunchest allies, Solano and Harper, were quietly promoted for their integrity. That evening, Marcus returned to Precinct 4, not as a scapegoat, but as a consultant. In the briefing room, he watched as officers, young and old, black, white, brown, gathered around a whiteboard to plan neighborhood outreach events. The room felt lighter, the chatter infused with real purpose. As he stepped into the corridor, Marcus passed the empty cell where he'd once felt trapped by false charges. Now it stood clean, a silent testament to the precinct's darkest hour and its rebirth. He placed a hand on the wall and allowed himself a steadying breath. The fight had been grueling, the cost high, but at last, Precinct 4 was purged of its toxins, and the seeds of true reform were taking root. Less than 2 months after the public hearing vindicated him, Marcus Thompson found himself summoned not to a disciplinary board, but to City Hall. The invitation bore the seal of Mayor Cynthia Alvarez and arrived via official courier. "Sergeant Thompson, please join us for an important announcement regarding Precinct 4. When he stepped into the marble-floored rotunda that morning, his uniform freshly pressed and his polished boots clicking against the tile, a small crowd of city officials and reporters greeted him with applause rather than suspicion. Mayor Alvarez rose from behind the podium and offered a warm smile. "Sergeant Thompson," she began, her voice echoing through the ornate hall, "your courage in exposing corruption has not only cleansed a precinct, but restored faith in our entire police force. It is my honor to appoint you as acting precinct commander of Precinct 4, effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the assembled press. Marcus's heart pounded, equal parts pride and disbelief. Later that day, as he strode into the precinct's front doors, this time wearing the crisp white epaulets of his new rank, he paused to take it in. Gone were the faded teamwork posters. In their place stood banners declaring integrity, accountability, and community first. Fresh recruits in pristine uniforms filed past him, eyes bright with curiosity. Veteran officers snapped to attention as he passed. Even those who'd once whispered behind his back now offered respectful nods. In his new office, a corner room with a view of the parking lot, he found a thick binder labeled Precinct 4 Renewal Plan. Over the next week, Marcus held one-on-one meetings with every shift: patrol officers, detectives, dispatchers, and civilian staff. He listened as they voiced frustrations born of the scandal, broken trust in leadership, fear of retribution, uncertainty about the future. He answered each concern with transparency, chain of command changes, clear protocols for reporting misconduct, and a promise that no voice would be silenced under his watch. Marcus's first major initiative was the Ethics and Inclusion Training Program. He enlisted Detective Rosa Solano and Officer Lee Harper to co-lead. On a chilly Monday morning, the precinct's briefing room transformed into a makeshift classroom. Charts detailing scenarios of racial bias, interactive role-playing exercises, and case studies of community policing filled the tables. Officers rotated through stations where they practiced de-escalation techniques and learned subtle signs of implicit bias. When a young patrolman hesitated in a mock traffic stop, his voice wavering as he addressed a black driver, Marcus quietly coached him on respectful language and tone, guiding him through a more empathetic approach. Despite initially skeptical grumbles, "We don't need therapy, we need to catch bad guys," attendance and engagement climbed each week. The turning point came when a seasoned sergeant, once one of Harding's staunchest defenders, stood up mid-session and admitted, "I've never thought about how my own assumptions might hurt the people I serve." His confession sparked a cascade of honest dialogue, breaking down walls of defensiveness. Outside the station, Marcus spearheaded community ride-along days. Neighbors from all backgrounds joined officers on patrol, sharing meals at local diners and visiting community centers. He himself sat in a patrol car next to Mrs. Adeyemi, an elderly resident who'd been wary of police since childhood. Over coffee, she admitted she felt safer knowing Marcus led precinct outreach. He promised to hold monthly neighborhood forums so residents could voice concerns directly. Back at his desk each evening, Marcus reviewed reports from the anonymous reporting hotline he'd helped establish, calls ranging from petty misconduct to serious complaints. He personally ensured every case received a timely response. When a dispatcher reported rumor mongering by a junior officer, Marcus convened a short disciplinary hearing. When graffiti tagging surfaced near the community center, he coordinated with neighbors to install better lighting and cameras. By the end of his first quarter as acting commander, key metrics had shifted. Citizen complaint resolutions rose by 40%. Community surveyed trust in police jumped from 22 to 65%, and internal misconduct referrals, once whispered and suppressed, now flowed openly. In his office, the binder of the renewal plan lay open beside a framed photo of his old patrol car and his new precinct crest. As dusk settled, Marcus stood at the precinct's front steps, watching the glow of streetlights illuminate the newly repainted facade. The journey from framed sergeant to precinct leader had been arduous, but with each training session, each community conversation, and each transparent decision, he was forging a police force that lived up to its highest ideals. In that moment, Marcus knew his fight had transcended personal vindication. He was rebuilding trust where it had been broken, paving the way for a future in which justice and equality would guide every shift. The morning sun slanted through the tall windows of City Hall's auditorium as Marcus Thompson took his place on the dais, flanked by Mayor Cynthia Alvarez, Police Commissioner Elena Cruz, and his two closest allies, Detective Rosa Solano and Officer Lee Harper. The room was filled with a standing room-only crowd, community leaders, fellow officers, journalists, and neighborhood residents who had rallied behind him. A hush fell as Mayor Alvarez lifted a gold-embossed document. By the unanimous vote of the Police Commission, she announced, we appoint Marcus Thompson as Chief of Precinct 4. His unwavering integrity and visionary leadership have restored trust where it was broken. A ripple of applause swelled into a standing ovation. Marcus felt his chest tighten, not with nerves but with gratitude. He stepped forward, heart pounding, and carefully affixed his new rank insignia, 3 silver stars, gleaming on his epaulets. The assembled badge pins clinked as he saluted the mayor, then turned to face the crowd. In that moment, the weight of the past months, false accusations, isolation, the fight for justice, melted away, replaced by a quiet resolve to honor the trust placed in him. His inaugural address was both personal and commanding. Today, Marcus began, voice steady, we mark not only a change in leadership, but a renewal of purpose. Precinct 4 will serve as a beacon of transparency, accountability, and community partnership. He outlined concrete goals, expanding the Community Oversight Board's mandate to include budgetary review, launching a mobile app for real-time feedback on officer-citizen interactions, and instituting a quarterly open-door forum where any resident could meet the chief without appointment. Each promise was met with cheers, but also thoughtful nods. His audience knew these were not empty words. After the ceremony, a crowd overflowed into the courtyard, where tables lined with coffee and pastries awaited. Neighbors congratulated him with handshakes and hugs. Mrs. Adeyemi, who'd shared ride-alongs. The high school students from the youth council, whose graffiti prevention mural now decorated the precinct's sidewall. And union representatives who had stood by him throughout the legal battle. Detectives in crisp dress uniforms raised coffee cups in salute, while junior officers lingered in clusters, furtively studying their new chief's measured confidence. Behind the scenes, Marcus convened his first Chiefs Roundtable in the crisp, blue-walled conference room. Attendees included community advocates, faith leaders, and precinct lieutenants. He began with a frank assessment, commendations for the dramatic drop in unresolved complaints, acknowledgement of ongoing challenges like recruitment and mental health resources for officers, and a clear mandate to tackle systemic bias through data-driven training. Each participant left with assigned action items, and Marcus scheduled follow-up check-ins to ensure accountability. That evening, as he walked through Precinct 4's corridors, now freshly painted in warm grays and blues, he paused at the evidence room door. The wall beside it bore a small plaque, in memory of truth and resilience. He ran his hand over the cool metal frame, recalling how that space had once been the site of his undoing. Now, it stood secure under new protocols he'd instituted: dual access logs, tamper proof encryption, and monthly forensic audits. In that quiet moment, he felt the full circle of his journey, from falsely accused sergeant to the precinct's first black chief, anchored in hard won reforms. As dusk settled, Marcus made his way outside to the precinct's steps. Below him, the city lights of Redford Township glowed like a tapestry of hopes and challenges. He took a deep breath of the crisp evening air, reflecting on how a conspiracy intended to destroy him had instead forged a leader capable of transformative change. With each step he took back inside, he carried the promise that every officer under his command and every resident they served would know that in Precinct 4, justice would always prevail.